Ethan Vale had built his empire from nothing but sheer will and sleepless nights. He was the kind of man who measured his life in quarterly reports and market shares, not in laughter or love. His world was glass, steel, and silence, and lately, the silence had started to echo. It wasn't that he didn't know what loneliness felt like, he just learned to ignore it, or, more accurately, drown it in work. But Marcus, his oldest friend and business partner, saw the cracks in the armor. "You're 36, Ethan. Billionaire, influential, and you spend your Friday nights negotiating contracts with people who already said yes," Marcus had teased one evening, leaning back in Ethan's office chair with a smirk. "You need to start living." Ethan didn't even look up from his laptop. "Work is living. Work is dying slower." Marcus stood, walking to the window overlooking Manhattan's skyline. "You know, most people would kill for your life. But you, I built it," Ethan interrupted sharply. "Yes," Marcus said softly. "But now you're trapped inside it." That line lingered in Ethan's mind for days. Then, as if determined to prove his point, Marcus showed up the next morning with a grin and an envelope. "One more blind date," he said. "Last one, I promise. If you hate it, I'll never bring it up again." Ethan arched a brow. "You said that last time. This time I mean it. She's not like the others." "None of them are, according to you," Ethan muttered. Marcus only smirked. "You'll thank me later." So here he was, sitting in a dimly lit booth at Le Maire, one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. The waiter had come twice already, first to offer wine, then to politely ask if he wanted to order. Each time, Ethan declined. He wasn't even sure why he came. Maybe to prove to Marcus he was right, that love wasn't something you could schedule between meetings. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window, blurring the neon lights of passing cars. Inside, the low hum of conversations surrounded him, none of which he cared to join. He loosened his tie, sighed, and thought about leaving. Then the restaurant door opened. She stepped in, not in the glitter and glamour he had come to expect from the women Marcus usually set him up with. No polished smiles, no calculated walk. She was real. Her hair, chestnut brown, was slightly damp from the rain. She wore a long green coat, simple jeans, and boots that looked far too practical for a place like Le Maire. She stood at the entrance, scanning the room with hesitant eyes, like someone who wasn't sure she belonged. Ethan's first thought was that she was lost. His second thought, which came far too quickly, was that she was beautiful. Not the magazine kind of beautiful. The kind that caught you off guard because it wasn't trying to. When her eyes met his, he felt something tighten in his chest. Recognition? No, he didn't know her, but for some reason, he felt like he did. She hesitated before walking over. "Mr. Vale." Ethan stood automatically, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. "You're my date." Her lips curved into an uncertain smile. "I think so. Marcus said you'd be the one looking like you wanted to leave." That made him laugh, an actual, startled laugh. He couldn't remember the last time someone made him do that without trying. "Guilty," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "And you must be the mysterious stranger Marcus promised wasn't like the others." She took her seat across from him, eyes glinting with amusement. "He said something similar about you. That you're not as terrifying as you look." Ethan smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Their waiter appeared again, and this time Ethan didn't send him away. He glanced at her. "Do you like wine?" "I like coffee," she said. "But wine's fine too." He chuckled again. "Coffee it is, then." As the waiter left, Ethan studied her more carefully. There was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself, even if her fingers occasionally fidgeted with the edge of the napkin. "So, what do I call you?" he asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara James." "Clara," he repeated softly. "That's nice. So, Clara, what convinced you to walk into a blind date with a stranger?" Her gaze flickered toward the window, where raindrops slid down like tiny rivers. "I almost didn't come. Marcus texted me out of the blue. Said it was a favor. I thought it was a joke." Ethan tilted his head. "A joke?" She nodded. "I used to work for his sister's company, marketing firm. He helped me out once when I was struggling. So when he called, I couldn't say no." Ethan leaned back, arms folded. "So you didn't come here for me?" "Should I have?" she asked, teasingly. He smiled faintly. "Most people do." Her brow arched. "You mean most people come for your bank account?" "Something like that." Clara looked at him then, really looked. "You don't seem as shallow as your reputation." He met her gaze, curious. And what reputation is that? The cold, untouchable CEO who doesn't believe in anything he can't control. He almost replied with something defensive, but her tone wasn't cruel. It was, observant, honest. That's not far off, he admitted after a moment. Control keeps things from falling apart. Clara smiled softly. Maybe, or maybe it just keeps you from ever feeling anything real. That struck deeper than he expected. He wanted to change the subject, but before he could, she added gently, sorry. I didn't mean to sound rude. You didn't, he said. You just caught me off guard. The waiter returned with 2 steaming cups of coffee. The rich aroma filled the air, grounding them both. Clara wrapped her hands around her cup, eyes brightening. You know, this place doesn't serve coffee to just anyone. I know the owner, Ethan said. Of course you do. They both laughed again, and for the first time in years, Ethan realized he wasn't thinking about his phone, his company, or the next deal waiting for him. He was just there, with her. As the rain outside turned heavier, time seemed to slow. Clara told him about her work at a small publishing house, about how she once dreamed of being a novelist before life and bills got in the way. Ethan listened, really listened, fascinated by how her voice shifted from shy to passionate when she spoke about books. When she finally asked him about his life, he hesitated. It's mostly business, he said simply. Then tell me something that isn't, she challenged gently. Ethan blinked. No one had ever asked him that before. I play the piano, he said at last. Clara's eyes lit up. Really? Used to, he corrected. Not much time for it now. You should, she said with quiet certainty. You look like someone who needs to remember what music feels like. That made him fall silent. Something about her voice, soft, unassuming, carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Outside, thunder rumbled. Inside, Ethan felt something stirring he hadn't felt in years, curiosity, warmth, maybe even hope. As the evening stretched on, he realized something strange. This blind date, this supposed joke, didn't feel like a setup anymore. It felt like fate knocking softly at his guarded heart. And Ethan Vale, for once, wasn't sure he wanted to close the door. When Ethan woke up the next morning, the world somehow felt different. Not the skyline outside his penthouse, that was the same expanse of gray steel and glass, but something within him had shifted. He made coffee himself, something his assistant usually did, and found himself smiling at the absurdity of it. The night before replayed in his mind like a film he didn't want to end. Clara's laughter, her unpolished honesty, the way she looked straight into his eyes when most people looked at his bank account. He had gone to dinner expecting another shallow, awkward evening. Instead, he'd met someone who made him forget he was Ethan Vale, billionaire CEO of Vale Enterprises. For a few hours, he'd just been Ethan. But now, as the city woke beneath him, he couldn't help wondering, was that all it was? A rare, fleeting night. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Marcus. Marcus. So, did she scare you off or melt the ice? Ethan typed, paused, then deleted what he wrote twice before sending. Ethan. She was unexpected. Marcus replied instantly. Marcus. Translation. You actually liked her. Didn't you? Ethan ignored that, but his silence was answer enough. For the rest of the week, Ethan tried to focus on work, quarterly reviews, board meetings, investor calls. But no matter how loud the office buzzed, Clara's voice echoed in his head. You look like someone who needs to remember what music feels like. That line, it stuck to him. One night, after another 12-hour day, Ethan walked into his penthouse, poured himself a drink, and found himself standing before the old piano in the corner. It had gathered dust, untouched for years. He hesitated, then sat down. His fingers pressed the keys, hesitant at first, then more certain as notes filled the room. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And for the first time in a long time, so was he. He didn't know why, but he wanted Clara to hear it. 3 days later, he texted her. Ethan. Clara, this is Ethan. The terrifying CEO from Billionaire. A few minutes passed. Then, Clara. Oh, the man who finally smiled. I remember. He grinned. Ethan. Coffee again, on neutral ground this time. No waiters in tuxedos. She replied almost instantly. Clara. There's a small cafe near Central Park. They serve cinnamon lattes. Can you handle that kind of danger? Ethan. I'll take my chances. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Ethan arrived early, old habits, but for once, he didn't mind waiting. When Clara walked in, her green coat was gone, replaced by a light sweater and the same easy warmth in her eyes. She sat across from him, smiling. "You actually came. I don't back out of challenges," he said. "Good," she teased, "because I was starting to think billionaires evaporate outside luxury restaurants." He laughed. "Some do." As they sipped their coffee, the conversation flowed, not forced, not polished. She talked about her work, about the manuscripts she read, the struggling authors she helped. He listened, and when she asked about his company, he didn't give her the rehearsed lines. He told her the truth. About the pressure, the sleepless nights, the loneliness no one ever saw. "You sound tired," she said softly. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "Sometimes it feels like everything I built just keeps me from living." Clara's eyes softened. "Then maybe you built the wrong kind of empire." That sentence hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her, really looked, the way her hair fell across her face when she laughed, the way she never seemed impressed by his title. And for a moment, he realized something terrifying. He didn't want to go back to the life he had before her. Over the next few weeks, they met again. And again, sometimes for coffee, sometimes a walk through the park, sometimes just to sit in silence while she read and he watched her. He learned she had once been engaged, to a man who left her when her father fell ill and her life became too complicated. She learned that Ethan's parents had died when he was 21, and that maybe his obsession with work wasn't about ambition, it was about control, because he'd lost too much too young. They never planned it, but something unspoken began growing between them, quiet, steady, undeniable. Then one evening, after a walk along the river, Clara stopped suddenly. "You ever wonder what people see when they look at you?" Ethan smirked. "A cold-hearted CEO, apparently." She shook her head. "That's not what I see." He looked at her curiously. "What do you see?" "A man who built walls so high, he forgot he could climb them." He said nothing. He just looked at her, and something in his chest shifted again. When she finally smiled and whispered, "Maybe it's time you did," he couldn't hold back anymore. He leaned in and kissed her, soft, hesitant at first, then real. The kind of kiss that made time stop. But life, as always, doesn't pause for happiness. A week later, Vale Enterprises was hit with a major crisis. A competitor had launched a hostile takeover attempt, and Ethan's board panicked. Suddenly, the man who'd just rediscovered life was dragged back into the storm. The next few days blurred into endless calls and sleepless nights. Clara texted him, simple things like, "Don't forget to eat." He wanted to reply, but the chaos swallowed him whole. By the time the dust settled, he'd saved his company. But in the process, he realized he might have lost something far more valuable. He showed up at the cafe one rainy evening, the same one they'd met in weeks before. Clara was there, sipping her cinnamon latte, reading. She looked up, startled but smiling. "You're alive," she said. "Barely," he admitted, sliding into the seat across from her. "I'm sorry, I disappeared. I figured you were saving the world again." He smiled tiredly. "No, just my company, but I realized something while I was doing it." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "That none of it matters if I don't have someone to share it with." Clara looked down at her cup, quiet. "You don't need to say that because you're tired." He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers. "I'm saying it because for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of being real." Her eyes met his, and the silence that followed said everything. Then she smiled, that soft, disarming smile that had undone him from the very beginning. "So what now, Mr. Vale?" He exhaled, relieved, almost laughing. "Now I stop building walls. And maybe start building something that actually feels like home." Clara squeezed his hand. "Good, because I was getting tired of knocking." Outside, the rain began again, steady and rhythmic. Inside, the world finally felt quiet, not the empty kind of quiet Ethan used to live in, but the peaceful kind that comes when you finally stop running from what matters. And as the city lights reflected on the window beside them, Ethan realized the truth he'd been blind to all along. Sometimes the best things in life don't come from control, strategy, or power. Sometimes they walk into a restaurant on a rainy night wearing a green coat, and remind you what it means to feel human again. He smiled at her, truly smiled, and whispered, "Guess one final blind date wasn't such a bad idea after all." Clara laughed softly. "Told you, You're not as terrifying as you look. And for once, Ethan Vale didn't care about his empire, his reputation, or the world outside. He just reached for her hand, and finally, let himself live.